Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I'm BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today, well, we come bearing bad news. Unfortunately, the Minnesota Vikings dropped the game as we're scared they might against the Cincinnati Bengals this past weekend by a score of 27-24 in overtime. So we're going to spend the entire show today recapping that. Obviously, there's some hard points that we're trying to hit on here. There were some good things, and we did get some kind of more information about this team and kind of the direction that they may be heading. So we'll hit on a couple of things here, and then we'll get you out of here in about 30 minutes or so. So that's the game plan for today. So let's get it started. We always start with the quarterback because, I mean, first and foremost, we're going to be critical of Kirk Cousins, but it starts and ends with Kirk Cousins. So if this team loses, I mean, the box score may look nice, but ultimately the headline at the top says 27-24 Cincinnati. He's going to be criticized regardless. I'm not saying the box score numbers don't look good. They really do. 36 for 49, 351, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. Sounds great on paper, right?
Yeah, it does. And that's the issue with kind of trying to evaluate Kirk Cousins and what he is, because it's been this sort of meme, right? That like he always gets the box score numbers. He's what is that stat about? 25 touchdowns passing 6 years in a row or something like that. He's one of like 5 ever to do it or something.
Right.
He finds a way to put those numbers together. Part of that is being healthy all the time. And part of that is his teams are often in situations that they need to be throwing the ball, which you looking deeper into that, is that because there's no defense on his side? Is that because he's having bad games? What is that? In this circumstance, this game against Cincinnati, you look at that first half, really the first 3 quarters, and my goodness, the offense was just discombobulated. And there's a lot of reasons to go around. We'll get to a couple of those reasons that were maybe outside of Kirk Cousins, but I think he in particular, there's a couple of things that you watch the game and you kind of, I was just so annoyed with the pocket presence. Like he wasn't moving from that one spot where you do your 3-step drop and you sit there, you look, and any other functioning quarterback would think to move a little bit if throwing angle's not there. If the angle for the pass isn't there, what have you, he just wouldn't do it. Or if the pass rush was backing up into him to throw off his rhythm, and he just refused to move at all. And when he did move, it was too late, and by that time there was Bengal defenders swallowing him up. So that's, and again, there was the penalties, there was the pass protection, there's context that goes into this, but ultimately Kirk Cousins was not good for 3 quarters. And I think it was a large contributing factor to the reason the Vikings were down 2 touchdowns and needed to come on this comeback rally. So I don't know what I would, if there's a blame pie chart, I'm not sure what I would put Kirk Cousins in his kind of section of that chart. But it was not good. A lot of things went wrong offensively to start that game. He was certainly one of them.
The pocket presence becomes that much more frustrating too, just when you see what Kyler Murray did this weekend, or if you're paying attention to Russell Wilson, or even Tom Brady on Thursday night. The pocket presence thing, it gets that much more annoying. Joe Burrow, perfect, right? Yeah, and just kind of the situational awareness as well. So first and foremost with the stat line, it is important to account for the fact that yes, the penalties weren't necessarily Kirk's fault. They were primarily the offensive line's fault, with the false starts, the holding penalties, etc. A lot of his numbers are somewhat inflated because they were making up damage they created themselves, right? The Vikings add 20, 30 yards to their drive because they're backing themselves up 20, 30 yards, here and there.
Yeah.
Ridiculous penalty numbers. That was just absurd. And, that's one thing that you can't blame Kirk Cousins on.
Or 90 or something.
I think it was 12, man. I'm pretty sure it was 12 penalties.
Ended up being 12, I believe.
Yeah. So, in total, it's just it's something that, we can't pin that on Cousins alone. It's, again, mostly the offensive line, but also defensively, not necessarily the greatest in that regard either. But as a whole, it's hard to win when you have that many penalties, right? Like when you're in the double digits and you're constantly being pushed backward or forward.
That's why the context is important to add here. Because we want to, I don't want to say we want to blast Kirk Cousins. We never want to do that. but this offense was just miserable to watch for 3 quarters. The pass protection wasn't awesome. And the penalties obviously sucked. And again, I do think some of that blame needs to also go to Kirk, because you're the captain of the offense. Like, that's your job to make sure everybody knows the snap count, and there's no illegal formations or false starts or whatever. Like, those types of things, to some degree, as quarterback, you got to be like, all right, guys, like, come on, let's figure this out. Let's pay attention, whatever the case might be. And then it was the offense as a whole was incredibly stale, and there's other factors that go into that. We'll get to play calling in a little bit, but Kirk was just, it was tough to watch for a while. He was very uncomfortable in that first quarter and a half, and to his credit, he pulled it back when he needed to, right? When the Vikings really needed him to make throws in the regulation, he did. Right. Threw a couple of seeds in there. That one to Conklin in that final drive was awesome. Right. Down the seam. So, there was certainly some good things, but you can't play a quarter of good football and expect to win. So, right. And he played essentially 3 quarters of pretty, average, mediocre, or below that football. And most of the time that's not going to be good enough. So that's kind of my assessment of Kirk. He puts up the numbers. That's great. The box score numbers, I don't care about those. When it's 3rd and 8 and you really need to make the big play when the pocket's collapsing, and you got to find that angle, find that whatever it is, he's not going to do that. He had many opportunities to do that, make that kind of play where he lifts the team on his back and keeps the drive alive, and he's never going to do that. And I think that's where we as fans and maybe critics of Kirk are kind of we've been standing on the table, pounding the table for, trying to make that point all year. And we saw it in the first 3 quarters of this game.
So it's 12 penalties for 116 yards, by the way, is the final figure there. I believe it was a total of 17 penalties called in the Vikings. Of course, 5 of those were declined. So those are the final penalty numbers that Kirk's working with. You can make the assessment for yourself. Cousins did some things great towards the end of the game, but I think ultimately the point that you just made, that you can't play great football for only 1 quarter, 25% of the game, or 25% of regulation, I guess I should say, in these circumstances, and expect to win the football game. To even be there at the end took, by Minnesota standards, a miracle from Greg Joseph, a 53-yarder at the end of regulation, just to get to a point where you had a chance to win, right? Or even a chance to tie. So Cousins, in my opinion, solid, didn't do enough though. And that's ultimately the difference between good and great. Like, was he good? Yeah, he was pretty good, especially when it mattered most. Like, he got it done when we were all saying, like, you got to get it done. You got to give him credit for that.
But unfortunately, ton of credit for that. Like, that's right. Those couple of drives. First of all, how about Zach Taylor going for it on 4th and 1 from his own 30? And I mean, that kind of started the whole comeback in a way. It was like, it's like, oh, they're going to do this. So, but yeah, that was, I didn't love it at all.
There were some things that he couldn't control, but the things that he could, I can't give him an A grade. So not everything's on Cousins. Obviously, you have the Dalvin Cook penalty. I don't want to get deep into the fumble, or excuse me, that's what I meant. And unfortunately, there's a couple calls here that are debatable, to say the least. I'm not going to argue with what happened there. Like, the fumble itself.
Problem is, you should need officiating help to beat the Cincinnati Bengals.
Exactly. That's the marked point there. So one player who did help Kirk Cousins offensively throughout the evening, throughout the afternoon, I should say, was KJ Osborne, who kind of established himself as that wide receiver 3 for the Vikings, or at least in terms of target share. He
share, snaps, all of that. He was, and it was interesting because you kind of heard this hubbub. The Saturday and Sunday leading into the game, it was, you hear from like your Paul Allen, your K-fan guys, that D.D. Westbrook's going to have this big role. So that's kind of what I was expecting. And then I get in there, and KJ Osborne, first of all, they ran a ton of 11 personnel, a ton of 3 receiver sets. Kind of must have felt like they needed to do that with the Irv Smith injury. And I think Osborne had 9 targets, which I know Kirk threw a lot, but I believe the 9 targets was tied for second. I think it went Thielen 10,
Jefferson.
Osborne, Jefferson. So that's clearly he's your 3rd receiver. And so I like it. He seemed to be a pretty solid player. He made a couple of really big catches. I think he had a 4th down one that was huge to keep a drive alive.
Right after the catch as well.
Yeah.
The ball in his hands. That punt return mentality that he's always had.
Yeah. There was a 3rd and 24 that Kirk dumped it down to like a 5-yard depth of pass. He broke
Another
a
reason we're
tackle,
mad at
took
Kirk,
it,
by the way.
took it down for the first down. So yeah, exactly. That was annoying, but no, I think KJ's he seems to be that third guy. So credit to him, because I think last year most Vikings fans like, get rid of this guy,
Right. I
and
think
now
we
he
said
seems
that,
to be
honest.
and he seems to be a pretty solid contributor for this offense right now.
Yeah, the evolution of him as a receiver, right? We always knew that he was great if the ball stayed in his hands. The problem with him is that we got mad at him as a punt returner because he wasn't catching it 100% of the time, which is just unfortunate, because once the ball is in his hands, I mean, you can see the type of plays that he can make. Now, some of that is just a major blunder by Cincinnati, especially on that 3rd and 20+ play that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Some of that is on Cincinnati just straight up screwing
Oh, yeah.
up. But the fact that he is dangerous with the ball in his hands, I mean, that gives you true bona fide playmakers in Jefferson and Osborne. Of course, Dalvin Cook out of the backfield, as he continues to be, get more and more kind of feel for the football this season. And then, of course, you got Adam Thielen, who continues to be a great red zone target. So you have a legitimate, 3-4 punch offense here. If Osborne continues to give you, what he got yesterday. I mean, you can make an argument that Osborne was, had a greater impact on the game than Justin Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
You can make that argument.
No, I mean, I don't know if we say that if they correctly call Jefferson's long play a touchdown, but
you do have to keep in mind that Jefferson sets up that touchdown, but Osborne was also a big factor in that drive as well.
Yeah.
And he kept drives alive that maybe shouldn't have been kept alive on.
Yeah, I mean, he made a couple of nice contested catches too, that like over the middle where you got defenders on top of you. So I was impressed with him a lot. I'm not just gonna sit here and say the Vikings have their third receiver. The thing I've been harping on all year, that the Vikings need to get one, but certainly a solid step in the right direction in terms of that. There, really nice to see that Osborne. It's funny, he's wearing number 17. He kind of played a little bit to Jarius Wright's kind of role and sort of niche there. So that was fun to see, and I hope it continues.
Worth noting here that D.D. Westbrook was not silenced. He did have the one important catch for 11 yards late in the game to put on his stat sheet for the Vikings, his first with the Vikings, of course. All right, so moving forward here, last piece on offense, then we're going to switch over to Joe Burrow and kind of the status of the NFC North. The play calling as a whole. I mean, Clint Kubiak, it's his first game. We're going to be judging this guy basically from the start here. There's no resume to work off of. We have an idea of who he's going to be because of who his father was and who he's been kind of worked under throughout his career progression to this point. How do you feel about the play calling? Like, in terms of, you're scoring 24 points, so not a bad introduction. It's kind of a mediocre to average defensive opponent, though. You have to factor that in. Overall, how do you feel about Clint Kubiak, how he starts off here? Obviously, he's going to be making adjustments and growing throughout the season, but the initial introduction to how he's going to be calling games for the Vikings, how do you feel? Where are you at?
Yeah, that was a tough intro, especially again, out of the gate. We talked about how Kirk was kind of stale to start, and I think some of that was due to the play calling, the game plan, the calls being made. And, I kind of went through my Twitter feed and was talking with people that I trust, that know what they're talking about, and it was a lot of, well, actually not a lot of play action, which is clearly what Kirk, how he thrives. That was how he was so efficient and successful in 2019, a lot of it in 2020 as well. He's excellent in play action. It gets him into a rhythm. The Vikings, I think it was 11% of passing plays were play action yesterday, compared to, I think it was like 27 or 28% last year. So clearly they're taking away really what Kirk does best. And that's just right away. That's how you get the guy out of a rhythm. So, we're trying to provide the context all together here for sort of why Kirk was not great to start, but also, I mean, we're not trying to absolve Kirk from blame, because clearly we talked about his shortcomings, but I don't think Clint made it easier on him. And then you combine the penalties in there, and that made it tougher for Clint too. So everything was out of rhythm early on, and clearly nobody on that side of the ball was really ready for the regular season to start yesterday, and it showed on the scoreboard there. So I just, in so much kind of pretty stale concepts with the ball, not a ton of jet sweep motion. We had the trickery with Justin Jefferson throwing a pass. And then it seemed like Clint was like, all right, I got that out of the way. Now I can just go back to my conventional stuff. So you kind of think you got to mix up a little bit more than that. So I wasn't super impressed.
Okay. So I think that's a fair overall assessment of Clint Kubiak. I think the intricacies of the way that he called this game are really what it's going to annoy people if it continues. I'm speaking mostly about, I think this is a kind of a fan-wide issue that we all have. It's the 1st and 20 rush attempts. It's the 2nd and 20 rush attempts. It's the situation where you don't have to fold yet. Like, I know you got a holding penalty, and this is especially true of yesterday, right? Because of how many different times the Vikings offense got backed up and they didn't take a shot, right? When you get backed up on 1st down, whether that's a holding there or you get backed up on 2nd down and you get in a situation where you have to gain 20 yards, in theory, you're trying to cut that in half each time
immediately,
right? Immediately, so that you can get back to a 3rd and maybe manageable 3rd and long situation, as opposed to a 3rd and we don't have a play call in the playbook situation, right? It pisses me off, and I think it pisses all of us off when you call a running play. And I know the defense for this, right? Because it's like, yeah, we trust Dalvin Cook to being a guy that could get you 6-7 yards and put you back into a good situation. I'm with you that I think he does give you opportunity for that chunk yardage.
This is where we become analytics nerds, where it's like, I mean, the average pass play goes for
exactly
way longer than the average run play.
And that's
it doesn't
all
matter
we
if
need
it's
to talk about.
The only time that's never been that it wasn't completely true was 2012 Ponder versus Peterson, and it was the same number, 6.0. Mm-hmm. Ponder was 6 yards a pass, Peterson was 6 yards a rush. Other than that, every team in the modern era of football has averaged more yards per pass than run. It's pretty simple stuff. So I'm with you. The situational stuff, and again, it's tough as for anybody to be efficient on offense when you have 20 yards to go all the time, like the Vikings did. But that's just that's annoying, and that was an issue last year too with Gary Kubiak. Same thing. It was 2nd and 11. Let's run Dalvin Cook and get 2 yards, and it's still 3rd and long. Right. That stuff, especially when Kirk can be so accurate, pinpoint, kind of get into a rhythm with that short stuff.
He's great at the intermediate stuff.
You throw a little stick route to Tyler Conklin for 6 yards, and you got 3rd and 5. Something like that. Instead of it just seems like more has to go right when you run the ball in those scenarios.
It kind of sucks, but it just feels like a run play in that situation is giving up. And I think
it does. It really does.
Are frustrated with that. So that's not going to change. So if they continue to do this, whether it works or not, I think we're all kind of going to be like you're still going to groan. Like with the KJ Osborne play, for example, the fact that Kirk didn't take a shot downfield,
and that was one of like 8 circumstances yesterday where it was like 3rd and long. Right. In theory, you have a chance to get this thing and keep the offense alive, keep the drive alive. Instead, you're checking down to, Amir Abdullah for 4 yards, or CJ Ham out of the backfield for 4 yards, or whatever the case might be. A couple of times too, where receivers are, it's 3rd and 6 and receivers are running 4-yard routes. It's like, it just seems like a lot of times the Vikings don't really want to convert. It's like, all right, well, we want to make sure Kirk gets his completion percentage high enough, take the yards, and then either try to settle for a field goal or whatever the case might be, maybe a closer punt. But that part's annoying, and it doesn't seem like Clint is much different from Gary in that aspect. But then just the lower play action percentage really kind of annoyed me too.
Right. Yeah, it's just an overall kind of frustrating situation, especially considering that the Vikings had the ball for 35 minutes yesterday. It's not like they didn't have time to establish what they want to do. This is what they wanted to do.
You think about it this way, like Vikings had the ball for 35 minutes, won the time of possession clearly. Kirk throws for 350 yards and no turnovers, 2 touchdowns. That type of stuff, you think, well, the Vikings destroyed the Bengals in this game, but you add in some context about these penalties, and you add some context in about the lack of execution and efficiency early in the game when it mattered. Plus the Vikings defense, which we're going to get to here a little bit, talking about Burrow, but defense didn't really show up. Well, they showed up. They had a very measly game, I think, and all of a sudden the Vikings are losing to a Bengals team that was 4-11 last year, I think. So not great.
Right. Ultimately, when it came down to it, the Vikings were 6 for 16 on 3rd, better 2 for 2 on 4th down. And the defense operated well in those situations too. The Mike Zimmer kind of defensive, genius on 3rd down continues here. 3 for 14. It kind of goes along with your kind of what you were saying. All the stats say Vikings win. So what the hell happened? And really what it comes down to is it's those penalty yards. That's really the difference here on paper. You probably don't go to overtime without those penalties. A call goes your way. One of the two kind of major calls, if one of those goes your way and you have that extra timeout, or you straight up don't fumble the ball in that situation, you get to kick a field goal. I think the Vikings, there's some bad luck here, but ultimately you didn't do enough to beat a team like you said. They're like 4-12 last season. You got to beat teams like this if you think you're a contender. That really sucks. But you do run into the buzzsaw that is Joe Burrow, right? We talked about this. This podcast did not overlook Cincinnati. I said this on multiple occasions that this is a situation where they can compete with the Vikings offensively for sure right now. They have a great second-year quarterback, former number 1 overall pick. We weren't sure about how well he played with that injury, how, coming off of it. But we did have, a good feeling that he was going to be Joe Burrow again. And that's exactly what you got, right? The professional approach, the free play shot that he took that we've been screaming at Vikings quarterbacks to take ever since, at least what made it kind of memorable was Aaron Rodgers when he started doing it to the Vikings in the mid 2010s. But Joe Burrow's taking kind of that free play, ends up getting the penalty yardage and ends up, punching it and scoring. It's that veteran approach when he hasn't even played a full 16 or 17 game season yet. The Vikings I feel like we just ran into like kind of the first of many, Joe Burrow, kills basically, because I think he's gonna be doing this for a while. I think he's just starting out by overcoming the Vikings and that -3 spread, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing about Burrow that I think we also underestimate a little bit, like he's a gamer, like that kind of intangible that you can't really measure what he brings as like a leader and like the kind of the locker room guy. But yeah, so and prior to this game, I was kind of I wrote for Zone Coverage and I looked up all these numbers at how Zimmer had done against quarterbacks in their first or second year in the league. And he had been dominating them, 14-4 record. I think only 2 players had a passer rating in triple digits. And only 1 had thrown for 300 yards in a game. And so it was, it's a nightmare for opposing quarterbacks to go up against Zimmer and, when they're still young and still trying to get their feet wet in the league.
Even more so.
And Burrow just, took those narratives and threw them in the garbage. And I think part of it was just he's a gamer and he's got that team. He's clearly the leader of that team already, having not even started. I think that was his 12th or 11th start in the NFL. So he made the throws when he needed to. I think there was, he was still tentative to a degree. I think, and I think there were plays where the Vikings pass rush disrupted him a little bit. So it wasn't like he played flawlessly. But I will say the stones. It sounds like based on everything I've heard and read. The stones he had, right, so that 4th and inches where
oh my god, yeah,
they went for it there in overtime, and it sounds like the original play call from Zach Taylor was a QB sneak, and Burrow checked out of it into the play action pass, which is I respect the crap out of Joe Burrow for doing that, because I'm sure everybody in the stadium knew it was coming, and then it looked like even that, as Zimmer said in the press conference afterwards, like, yeah, we had seen the Bengals check into a play action on 4th and inches before. And if you watch the play again, the Vikings are totally ready for it. They're totally ready for the play action fake. Burrow just recognized that, Xavier Woods kind of got lost a little bit there and it was almost snuck behind him. So, and the throw was absolutely money. So for a guy, of Burrow's kind of status, right? He's his 11th start in the league, trying to get his team on the winning track, a franchise that's been pretty rough in a rough state lately. Overtime, need to make the throw to win the game, does it? That's the guy that I think we want the Vikings to have. And it just seems like, you don't really get that with Kirk right now. Kind of, is Kirk going to check out of the play there to something that, it's a pass on 4th and short in overtime? Does Kirk make that? I really don't think he does. I don't think he's got that moxie and that swag and that confidence that Joe Burrow does. So it's cool to see Joe Burrow do that, obviously not against the Vikings. So
Joe Burrow, of course, is kind of the highlighted reason of how the argument as to why we're saying that Kirk Cousins' box score stats kind of lie.
Yeah.
Joe Burrow, I think we all would agree that Joe Burrow played the better game, right? He won.
I think so.
I think we all would agree that 20 for 27, 261, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. The only thing that he was superior in to Kirk is, quarterback rating, 128.8, and average per attempt, which I think is really important. And so again, another thing that we always get.
It's an efficiency measure. Yeah.
Right. 9.7 versus 7.2. The volume numbers, of course, go to Kirk in this situation. But I think Joe Burrow, the efficiency, the situational efficiency, right? As soon as the Vikings went down and scored, so Joe Burrow came right back and lined his guys up. scored a touchdown
Yep.
immediately, right? He gets the situation at the end to set up to, the game-winning field goal in theory if Kirk doesn't come back and Greg Joseph doesn't hit that money shot for 53 yards. He set his team up to win time and time over. The Vikings just got trampled by what might be the start of Joe Burrow's legacy. I think that's what happened here. We've seen this in the past with Josh Allen too, and the Buffalo Bills lost last 2 years ago.
If Taylor doesn't go for that fourth down in their own territory there at the end of the third quarter, I think that's dumb. You're up by 14 at your own 30. I think that's a little too aggressive. And if they punt the ball away, a little bit, yeah. Okay. That one. I'm not talking about the one in overtime. I'm talking about the one end of the third quarter at their own 30 up by 14 points. If they punt that one away, I don't think there's a comeback that even happens, because the Vikings got that ball and they scored a touchdown soon after that. That was the Thielen one to make it 21-14.
That would have been the headline in the papers if Cincinnati loses this football game, by the way. That, like, the fact that he so many times and then, it worked out, fortunately for him.
Yeah.
Was it 3 out of the 4 gambles that he took?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the one that everybody would be focusing on. I don't think this would be a close game if they had punted that, to be honest. So, but Taylor redeemed himself by going for it there, and then Burrow helped out his coach with the check at the line of scrimmage into that pass play that ultimately won the game for him. So, because that's the thing too, even if you get the QB sneak at midfield, you still have another 15 yards to go to get into a field goal range. So Burrow kind of was just like, yeah, let's just go win this thing. And I love that about him, and I am jealous too of Bengals fans for that.
I think I think as a whole, the Vikings defense played a pretty good game. It's just those moments, right? They crumbled in those moments, and of course the penalties hurt too. That deep, like I said, the free play shot that ultimately was the defensive.
Also, Bashad Breeland was picked on.
Not good.
Picked on. All game.
That was a problem, and it makes it that much more of an issue that Cam Dantzler was inactive, which I'm mad about, by the way.
Bad run support, missed tackles all over. I mean, tackling Mixon seemed to be like the toughest task I've ever seen. Like,
127 yards and a touchdown from him.
Stiff arming Harrison Smith to the ground, and like it was just, I mean, Mixon's a good player, but it was I didn't see that coming, I guess. So obviously that was another piece of it too, another piece of context to include here, is that there is a bit more support from the run for Burrow than Cousins received. But
again, we can bend the truth however you want. Ultimately, the Vikings lost this football game. Nice to see Michael Pierce with 2 sacks. I know we didn't mention that here. Kind of glossed over in a I don't want to say a bad or abysmal defensive performance, but it's somewhere between average and subpar.
Yeah.
Within that, you do get 5 sacks, which is nice to see, especially from what this team was last year. You get 2 of them from Michael Pierce, who of course didn't play last year on that COVID reserve list. Harrison Smith gets that great sack. That was a lot of fun to watch. And of course, Danielle Hunter returns and immediately gets, a sack to add to his personal stat sheet. So that is one nice thing to look at. I've mentioned Greg Joseph as well. That's a great sign to see. I don't think any of us as Vikings
also that punt at the end of that punt.
Yes, the special teams as a whole. Harrison Hand too, going down the field and making key tackles inside, I think, the 15. Yeah. I mean, special teams, A+. Even though the Vikings lost this game, Greg Joseph, special teams as a whole, looks complete night and day from last year. I'm very excited about the special teams.
Yeah, I'm weirdly now that I've been talking through this show, I'm weirdly more optimistic about this loss than I feel like
this is important. This is a great segue because I feel you. And there's an okay reason to feel optimistic, and that's because every other NFC North team lost yesterday as well.
And
that's important here. 2 days ago, I should say, this is important because yes, the Vikings schedule does position them for this to potentially get ugly very quickly. I want to say that right now. If the Vikings are going to Arizona next week, then they get to come home and play Seattle and Cleveland.
That's a rough
stretch. About October 3rd. Yeah. So this could get ugly real quick. I want to point that out. On the flip side, mega reason to be optimistic here because apparently the NFC North is only playing 16 games this season. Green Bay, of course, gets dismissed by New Orleans yesterday, which was a beauty to watch if you didn't have Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams on your fantasy team like me. And then, of course, the Bears get destroyed by Matthew Stafford and kind of his introduction to the LA Rams. And of course the Lions are the Lions. They, basically get destroyed by the 49ers.
They almost actually pulled off the most miraculous comeback, but it was never actually going to happen. It was because it's the Lions, but it was kind of fun to be like, oh, this, I will say a lot of teams.
So nothing changed. The Vikings are technically in first place.
Right. A lot of people were upset, by the way, at the Lions losing by 8 versus more than 8. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? spreads. That was a tough beat for some people, not myself, thankfully, but
But it's still wide open for us.
It's still fans. Completely. I mean, yeah. I mean, you can't watch what the Packers did and just think they're the crowns. They're taking home the crown automatically again. It's not.
Did the Vikings play the best game in the NFC North of all 4 teams? I think
that's what I'm saying. That's what I thought. I was like now the other side of this is the Vikings missed a giant opportunity to get off to a great start.
They did lose to an AFC opponent though,
which they're technically leading. Like if the season ended today, which this is a crazy hypothetical, I know, but if the season ended today, they would be the NFC North champions,
which is hilarious and true.
Yes, but I will say this: the Packers did this last year at Tampa Bay, where just a stinker of a game, get blown out, and basically every other game besides that, they look pretty darn good. So I'm not gonna, jump to any conclusions about the Packers yet, but obviously you can't. That's the perfect way for for the season to start for Vikings fans. Besides the Vikings game, but the other NFC North teams, they all lost. They all look bad. So they got that going for us. If the Vikings can win 8-9 games this year, who knows? If the Packers keep looking like that, they might not get that 10-win mark that I think that they automatically do every year because of Rodgers.
I think we all kind of felt the gut punch around 3:30, right? Like we all felt like the season was coming down immediately.
Oh yeah.
We all felt that, but slowly over the course of the evening, the afternoon game plays out, Packers lose. We already knew Detroit lost, but we kind of figured that would happen. And then slowly LA takes down Chicago.
And the Bears are still the Bears. Now I will say, if
the loss doesn't hurt as much as I thought it would because of those 2 results. I'll say that.
And in this, like I said, talking through there's
some good things.
The Vikings game. There was some good things to take away. Obviously, at the end of the day, it all rides on Cousins, which is always going to limit the team a little bit. But there's some good things that happened. And the only thing I'm scared of now is, the Packers becoming the Packers again.
Right.
And Matt Nagy coming to his senses and finally starting Justin Fields and making him the full-time quarterback.
He's not doing it yet.
For whatever reason, he's not doing that. And by all means, Matt, take your time. But my word, I still cannot wrap my hand around that.
I think as far as the rest of the NFC North goes, to kind of close this out is I think we all can agree that the Packers are going to be better than they were yesterday. I don't think there's any expectation that Green Bay is going to play like that all season long. Detroit potentially might be better, at least offensively, than we thought. Jared Goff might be able to operate the system at a higher level, and I think we may have given him credit for, but that remains to be seen. I mean, that's a solid defense that he put, somewhat garbage time points, but when you put up over 30, you got to take notes. So maybe a little bit better, but Chicago.
Defensively, they're bad. Defensively, they're bad still.
For sure. And Okuda, of course, has gone with the Achilles.
That's
and
right.
He already wasn't playing well as it is. And then Chicago, until you put Justin Fields in, I think we're all on the same page there. That's I'm
not going to regard. I have no regard for Bears
or
Lions.
It's still open.
The Bears without Fields or the Lions, I have no regard for them. It's just if the Packers if they could rebound or not after that. If they are a little bit slow again next week, then this is, in my mind, this is a completely different conversation.
It's a bad loss, but it's not a backbreaking loss that we might have thought it would be. I'm not ready to burn everything down. You do go into Arizona next week, and this is, kind of to round out the show here.
Arizona looked real good.
Really good. Yesterday. I was right. I was very right. Hand up, pat on the back. Yep, I was very right. Anything to close this thing out, of course, we'll be focusing on Arizona and how the Vikings can prepare for that one and kind of the overall outlook on it later on this week. But to put a bow on this loss to Cincinnati, it hurts, of course, but reason for optimism. Is there anything we did not cover that you want to point out real quick before we move into Arizona and next week of NFL football?
I don't like doing the whole ref thing because you need to be able to beat Bengals without officiating help. But I do not know what down by contact means right now. But the whole Jefferson touchdown, that should have been a touchdoant, and the Dalvin Cook thing. With the fumble there,
stands versus confirmed.
It's so just like, and it's just, I did see someone make the comment too. I can't remember who it was, but they said the national TV games or the primetime games of the week or the Fox game, whatever the case may be, there's more angles there and more camera angles to be had, and in a way, it puts your Bengals and Vikings at this point at a disadvantage if a call is in question. So. Something to consider there. This isn't to blame anything. We talked already about how the many reasons why the Vikings lost this game and probably should have by more than they did. But just I don't know what down by contact means, and it seems like if you're not going to change like rulings on the field when they're pretty clearly not the correct one, then what's the point of going to review?
Stands versus confirmed. That's very annoying. And the Vikings got 2 stands yesterday, which of course means that there wasn't enough evidence, which I think everyone that had 2 eyes thought there was definitely enough evidence to make a confirmation one way or the other there yesterday. We won't dwell on that. We'll move on. But before that, I just want to point out too that, great debuts for the most part, with the exception of Breland, who we mentioned earlier. Breland did make some nice tackles, just of course could not cover it all. But great debuts from Nick Vigil, who totals 10 tackles, a couple for loss, and a sack as well.
I think he was key on that 4th down stop there.
Absolutely.
Too,
there was no expectations for him. He just needed to go out there and replace Anthony Barr for a week. He looked good. So, kudos to him and the way he played. Xavier Woods was in the mix too, with an unbelievable pass defense, where he put the helmet right on the football.
That's right.
It was beautiful early in the game. So, it looks like the Vikings got some nice pieces here. Of course, Patrick Peterson was hardly targeted in this game because Burrow was too busy taking advantage of Breland. Mackenzie Alexander drops an interception that might have, I think that changes the game if Mackenzie Alexander doesn't drop that pick. But again, I don't want to dwell too much on anything.
Ended up going for a first down
and a touchdown after that. So
that's right.
It's tough. We don't want to play what if, but that sucks. But I think that encompasses kind of what happened here in a nutshell, if you will. So we will be back later on this week to talk about Arizona, Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins. Chandler Jones with 5 sacks. My God, this is, this looks dangerous. But we will do our best to prepare you for that later on this week. And hopefully, the Vikings will come in prepared, because they're going to need to be playing, on the road against a team that just showed that they have as much firepower offensively as anyone. So we'll talk more about Mike Zimmer's defense of that and more later on this week. You can find us on, what will that be? Thursday? Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. Perfect.
Something like that.
iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, wherever else you listen to your podcast. If you prefer to watch this video, we will remain on YouTube as well. And that's it. So thank you guys for listening to us. Make sure to, I forgot to mention Daily Norseman. That was the other thing that's the thing that I always mention.
Good work here. Wow, this is a smooth conclusion here.
I'm going back to my roots here of not knowing how to close out a show. So anyways, thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you later on this week.